everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new to my channel, hello, my name is Katelyn Elliott, and I do sincerely apologize I haven't been able to put up as many videos as I usually do. My phone decided to shit itself, so I had to get a new phone, so ta-da, here I am filming a new video. And I just came back from leave as well, you know, Christmas time. I was away with family, so I really didn't have a lot of time to film anything, take like a whole lot of notes or anything, decide to plan my cases out. But I do have some more that I have planned out for you guys, so I hope you guys stick around for me for that ride, because I have up to, I believe, the beginning of February planned out just for videos. So thank you all for your patience, and let's get into the case. So the case that I'm going to be talking about today is the case of Charley Ross. And Charley Ross's case is actually pretty famous. Like, anyone who is anybody has probably ever heard of Charley Ross. And if you haven't, well, I'm very happy to be making this video, because it's a case that really like needs to be out there. It is a very informative case, and it's very frustrating to me because this happened so long ago, and it seems like to this day, you know, there's still cases out there that are similar to this, and these kids have never been found. So without further ado, I'm going to get into the case. So the case that I'm going to be talking about today, Charley Ross, it actually takes place back in the 1870s, 1874 to be exact. So Charley Brewster Ross, his full name was Charles Brewster Ross, but he went by Charley. And he was born on May 4th of 1870. I know May 4th, you know, Star Wars fans, May the 4th be with you. But it's not the same. It's just kind of like a little something that's kind of interesting, is that he was born on May 4th. And he is well known to be the first victim of American kidnapping for ransom. So he's the very first victim to be taken by someone, and then they demanded for the family to give them ransom money. So it is actually one of the most famous mysteries and disappearances in the entire United States. So that's pretty interesting, you know, that it's very well known. So his father, his name was Christian Ross. He owned a fine house in the wealthy part of the Germantown suburb of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So they were pretty well off, you know. So the mother's name is unknown. It's unknown what the mother's name was, but Charley also had an older brother. His brother was a year older than him. His name was Walter Lewis Ross, and he was 5 years old. And his brother is actually really important because he's also included, like, in this case. Like, he was part of what had happened to Charley. So during the time period, it was like really common to have children outside, you know, playing like with no adult supervision. So they'd be out there playing like together. Like Charley and Walter would be outside with no adult supervision playing together. So that was very you know, well known. So, oh, hi Riley. Everyone say hi to Riley. He's here to help in my video. So Philadelphia nowadays, you know, we would not let our kids be outside in Philadelphia by themselves, because it's very like crime ridden. You know, it's very unsafe to have your kids outside by themselves. So, but during that time period, it was completely different, you know. So Charley and his brother, they would play in the street like most children their ages did back then. And the adults really didn't worry too much about their children, because they were just like, oh, you know, if they're playing with other kids, they're fine, they're safe. So parents didn't even like go outside with their kids whenever they were outside playing. I know we're talking about 4- and 5-year-old, but the parents didn't even go outside with them most of the time. And the boys, they were within a very close like eyesight of their parents and everyone else outside, so they could all see them. You know, they could see the boys and watch them playing. So like I said, they weren't too worried. But unfortunately, while the two boys, Walter and Charlie, were outside playing, a horse-drawn carriage had pulled up to them right outside of their house. So as they were playing like in the street, this strange man pulls up, and they had never seen these people before, and it's unknown why they were in that area and why they stopped to talk to the boys. But they asked them, like, do they like candy and fireworks? Which, of course, they're like little kids. They're like 6 and 4, so of course they're gonna be like, hell yeah, fireworks, candy, yeah. So, they hopped into the carriage with these two men that they had no idea who they were, and, they went to get candy and fireworks. And like I said, neither boys knew who it was, like any of the guys who approached them. So they just went into like a horse-drawn buggy with complete strangers, which if I were a parent, that would have just freaked me the hell out. So the two men, they took Charlie and Walter to the local fireworks store, and they pulled up and they told Walter to get out and get some fireworks. And they gave him a quarter to pay for the fireworks, which, back then, a quarter was worth like $1, $2. So they told Walter at this time that they were going to wait for him with Charlie outside the store in their buggy. And Walter was like, okay, I'll just go and get these fireworks. So Walter went inside and he bought these fireworks. And, he was, like, super excited. He's like, oh, my gosh, I got these fireworks. I can set off fireworks with these men and my brother. Like, I'm super stoked. It's the 4th of July. It's great. He was so excited. But, unfortunately, when he went outside, like, he was just so excited. He ran outside to go and find the horse and buggy with his brother in it and these two men to show them the fireworks that he got. But he was stunned because they were gone. The horse-drawn buggy with the two men and Charlie were just completely gone. So nobody knew, like, where they went. So a couple days later, Christian K. Ross, that's the banker father, the very prominent guy with a nice house and everything, he began receiving these ransom demands after Charlie was taken. So they came originally as notes mailed from the post office in Philadelphia. So it seemed like these people were local to the area. So at the time, Christian thought it would be pretty easy to find them. And eventually, the letters just branched out all over the country. I mean, they were just getting stuff from San Francisco, Annapolis, Maryland, like all these areas that were so far away from Philadelphia, it started to get really, like, difficult to trace them. So it is noted that, like, the ransom notes were written in an odd handwriting, so, like, they've never seen, like, look like scribbles, essentially. And it seemed like the person was a little bit educated, but not too fully educated. Like, they went to school for, like, a couple of years and then dropped out or something. So it was said that, like, the writing and it was just really hard to understand. And many simple words were misspelled, like the word that and money and all these other, like, words that should have been really easy to spell. They couldn't spell them right. So the ransom amount, they were like, I want $20,000, which in today's time is $400,000. Which is a lot of damn money. I wouldn't be going around asking people for $400,000 to get their kid back. Like, hell no, that's a lot of money. I don't know where they would get that. And so the letters, they stated that if the Ross family got the police involved, they would ultimately kill Charlie. They were like, you have to give us this money, but if you tell anybody, your son will be dead. So they were basically, they had them by the balls, essentially. They had this family by the balls. And Christian, he obviously saw no other choice than to tell the police. He's like, I have to tell the police. They could possibly track down my son. I need to tell somebody. Especially because he didn't have the money. He didn't have $400,000. Or $20,000, sorry, $20,000. And he just was like, I don't know what else to do. I'm just going to go to the police. And within a matter of weeks, the kidnapping had become national news. So everybody in the United States at the time, however many states it was, they all knew about the Charley Ross kidnapping. It was all over the news. Everybody was selling them at the newsstands. Everyone was talking about it. It was just massive. So the Philadelphia police gave out like really heavy media coverage on the case, like immediately. And very prominent members of society, they were actually called upon, and they started discussing to each other about maybe we should get the Pinkerton National Detective Agency involved, the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. And the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, God, that's a mouthful, they printed out millions, literally millions and millions and millions of flyers and posted them everywhere. So there were multiple attempts actually to contact the abductors, but every time they tried to attempt to talk to them, there would be no answer. And no one ever showed up, like, especially when they were like, look, we have some money, we can give it to you in chunks, you know, so we can get our son back. And unfortunately, nobody ever showed up for that. So that's awful. So on December 13th of 1874, the home of Judge Charles Van Brunt, his home was actually broken into and robbed, which we're going to talk about that a little bit and how it coincides with the case. But listen, this pissed me off when I heard this. So his brother Holmes Van Brunt, he actually lived next door to the judge. So, you know, the judge, Charles Van Brunt, he ran over there and told his brother, like, hey, my house just got broken into. And his brother, he was like, oh shit, you know, let me just go out and get all of my friends. So they gathered up all these people and they went after the intruders. And they found them. And so the mob of people, they pulled out their guns and they opened fire on these two men, and they were instantly killed. So the two men, their names were Bill Mosher and Joe Douglas, and they were criminals who had recently just been let out of jail. It wasn't told, like, what they were in jail for, but they recently had gotten out. And this actually pisses me off so much because and so Bill Mosher, he was actually instantly killed by the gunfire. And Joe Douglas, he was mortally wounded. So he laid there dying. Like, he lived for like a couple of hours. And as he was lying there dying, he was talking to Holmes Van Brunt, the judge dude. And, no, the brother of the judge. And honestly, like, at this point, like I said, the kidnapping was national news, so everybody knew about Charley Ross. And this actually happened like a couple days afterwards. Like, it just, I really wish they would have put 2 and 2 together, but they really didn't. And if they were he was abducted by 2 men, and 2 men broke into this guy's house. I would not have shot at them if I was the judge. I would not have shot at the people breaking into my house. I would have immediately gotten a hold of the police or whoever the lead people were, and I would have told them, hey, you know, I just had some intruders in my house. You know, they seem pretty suspicious. I read about the whole Charley Brewster Ross kidnapping. Please come and take a look at them, see if they're your guys, you know? And Joe Douglas, as he was dying, he started just blabbing to the judge about knowing, supposedly knowing about what happened to Charley Ross. And it was thought, like, at this time that Joe was just bullshitting this, that he was just lying. And, you know, he was just, he's literally laying there dying. Like, why would he need to lie about something? What does he have to lose? He had nothing to lose. All he had to do, like, he was already gonna die. He might as well just get this off his chest. So he tells, the judge and everybody, he goes, listen, I was there with Bill Mosher when we kidnapped Charley Ross. And Joe, he originally stated that he believed that Charley was killed, or if he's still alive, Bill knows where he is. But, Bill's dead now because they just shot him, And Joe didn't tell any more details to the crime. He just said, listen, I know that Bill knows about it, but because you shot Bill dead, now it's going to go down to the grave with him, and it's just, it is what it is, basically is what he was saying. So after he confessed this, a couple minutes later, he died, unfortunately. And at the time, after they died, the judge and everyone, they were like, okay, so this dude just confessed to taking Charley Ross. They were like, we need to get the only witness to the crime and see if he knows these men. So they try to get a hold of Walter Ross, the older brother that was 5 years old, 5 or 6. Yeah, so they got a hold of him, and they brought him down to the judge's house where the 2 men were that had been shot and killed, the intruders. And at the time, Walter, he was in New York City at the time, so he had to travel, pretty long distance, especially by carriage back in those days. And by the time he got there, he was told to look at the bodies of Joe Douglas and Bill Mosher. He's like, hey, can you look at these 2 people and tell me whether or not you think these are the 2 men that took you and your brother? And as he's looking, he notices some pretty interesting characteristics, and granted, he was only 5 years old, 5 or 6, but I think as a 5 and 6-year-old, if someone who was strange to you, you've never seen them before, and they took you and your brother someplace, I'm sure you would remember who in the world they were talking about, because, the characteristics of these men were pretty distinguishable. So, Bill Mosher, he had a deformed nose, and Walter remembered this because he thought it looked kind of funny, and he said it looked kind of like the nose of a monkey, so he used to call it a monkey nose, and he remembered it very distinctly. So, it's said that Bill Mosher's nose was actually deformed from some type of syphilis or cancer. So one of the two. And which is actually really sad. Syphilis and cancer. I feel really bad for people like that. That's terrible. So terrible. And at that point, it became obvious to everybody, these were the 2 men that took Charley and Walter that day. And they were just like, okay, so we've got our suspects right here, right now. This is perfect. It's perfect for us. But unfortunately, like I said, they had been shot and killed, so there was no way of them to tell where Charley was located. So basically, that judge and his brother basically screwed everyone. Screwed the whole Ross family from figuring out what had happened to their 4-year-old little boy. And like I said, I'm not a parent, but to hear about a mother and a father who had lost their little boy, and they have been trying to find and locate him, and then get told that these are the 2 men that took their son, and instead of figuring out, hey, where did they put my son? Where's my son at? They're now dead. And the secret, unfortunately, the secret of what happened to Charley has now gone to the grave with these 2 men. And it's horrible to think about, because if the judge would have just, kept them in his house and demanded to know what they were doing and all this other stuff, and called the police, got a hold of, well, they can't call the police, they didn't have phones, but, got a hold of the police, whether by, like, getting on a horse and riding out there to find them, or whatever it may be, you know, he could have easily have cracked the case and they could have said what happened to Charlie, but instead, you know, now there's literally no more answers, and it's frustrating to the family, and it's honestly, it's frustrating to me, because, you know, it's just, instead of shooting someone who comes into your house, you're supposed to get a hold of someone, the police, like, oh my god. So, now we're going to be talking about the trials. So, this trial, it kind of confuses me of where and how, like, they, like, is everything connected? Was there people in cahoots with Bill Mosher and Joe Douglas? Do these people, like, was it a big conspiracy thing? Did they, like, why was this little boy targeted, and why are all these people involved? And from my standpoint, like, I started to think about it, and it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. I was just like, well, what if he got taken because they thought that these people had a lot of money and they could give them money to help out during the time of need? Because right now it's during, like, a big old, like, depression, so they didn't have, like, a whole lot of money, and they probably thought that since he was a banker, he probably had a lot of money, and it's so frustrating. So anyways, so the former Philadelphia policeman, he was arrested in connection to the case, and his name was William Westerfeld, and he actually was a friend of Bill Mosher, so he knew Bill Mosher, and it's possible that, like, the William Westervelt dude, it's possible that he knew about what had gone on, and he could have been in cahoots. Like, he could have done anything, you know? And it's just weird. And William Westerfeld, he was actually tried in front of a judge and jury back in 1875 for the kidnapping of Charley Ross. They didn't have any, like, substantial evidence or anything to connect him to the case. He was just arrested and charged with it because he was friends with Bill Mosher. And Westerfeld, he was just pulling shit out of his ass. He starts talking to Christian Ross, you know, the father, and he's just telling him, you know, what he wants to hear. Like, hey, your son, he's still alive, you know, whenever Bill died, you know, he was still alive, but I don't know where he is. And, you know, it's, as the father, you know, he was probably just, like, sitting there, like, so pissed off, like, where is my son? You say you know where my son is, where is he? And no one's given him any straight answers. However, like, due to lack of evidence, there was not enough evidence that linked William Westerfeld to the crime. So they started talking to Walter, the only other witness, and he was told to look at this William Westerfeld dude, and he straight up told the judge, the jury, everybody there, that wasn't him. That was not one of the men in the carriage that took me and my brother that day. It wasn't him. So William Westerfeld actually ended up getting tried and found guilty of conspiracy, which doesn't make any sense. Like, maybe he got charged with conspiracy because he was saying that, you know, at the time of Bill's death, you know, Charlie was still alive, like, lying about it or something. He was trying to get involved in the case and make himself, like, be the center of attention or whatever, because whatever, you know. But it just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, why would you say something that isn't true? Like, ugh. So, obviously, after he was found guilty of conspiracy, he spent 6 years in prison. Good. That poor family, though. They probably are just, like, running on fumes, just frustrated, trying to figure out what the hell happened to their son. And you've got these people trying to, you know, get famous and get attention. Like, they weren't involved. They were just, oh, what the hell is wrong with people? So, William Westerfeld, after he, like, did his fake confession and, like, said he never heard, like, never knew about any of this, like, was never involved, even though he said he was, he began to swear just up and down. He's like, I was never involved with this. I don't even know Charley Ross. I've never met Walter Ross. I've never seen these people a day in my life. I don't know anything about him. I don't know anything about the case. I'm innocent. Like, I haven't done a damn thing, you know? And he kept saying that he was innocent until the day he died. So, I mean, more than likely was innocent. I just feel bad. And then 2 years after Charley, you know, was abducted, the father, Christian Ross, he started writing a book about what had happened to his son. And the book was called The Father's Story of Charley Ross, the Kidnapped Child. And he wrote it to help raise money to help with search efforts to find his son. So, because, you know, at the time, you know, it was still a very well-known case, but he just wanted to get the word out there for everybody because he was just frustrated that nobody knew anything. And he just, little 4-year-old little boy, man. Oh, God. I can't imagine the guilt those parents must have been feeling, or even his brother, like, for the rest of their lives. You know, they had to live with the fact that their little boy was taken, and that Walter had to live with the fact that he was the one that was let go, and he was the one that possibly survived, or whatever. And, you know, it's just, I think they call it survivor's guilt. Survivor's guilt, yeah. So, I understand, like, the whole survivor's guilt thing. Like, if I were, Walter, I would have felt upset too, especially, like, because I'm the oldest of 3 children. I have 2 younger sisters, and if something would have happened to them, and I was let go, I would feel guilty. I'd be like, why didn't you take me too? The fuck? So, by 1878, this is like 4 years after the abduction of Charley Ross, the hype about the case, you know, the first ransom kidnapping case that was all, like, national news, it started to die down. People weren't as interested anymore, you know, they were like, oh, Charley Ross, old news, you know, and this was really hurtful to the Ross family. They're like, it may have been years later, and my son may now be, like, 8, and the other one could be 9, 10, or whatever, like, however old Walter was. They was like, it may be 4 years later, but my son is still missing. He is still missing. And the parents, you know, they were just trying to get as much, like, the word out there as much as possible. So Christian Ross, the father, the one that wrote the book, he decided to have the book reprinted, and it would be sold again in, like, all these different stores all over the world, you know, just to get the word out there again, like, get refreshed and everything out there, so his son's name wouldn't be forgotten. Then, he started traveling a lot. So, he would travel to Boston, Massachusetts, which I'm not sure how far away that was from Philly, but he would get in his horse and buggy, and he would travel to Boston, and he would give lectures about his son, and what happened to him, so that parents could be aware as well, like, there's people out there who want to hurt your children. And, you know, at the time, like I said, at the time, it was like the 1870s. Nobody was aware about this. Everybody felt safe in the world and community. The only thing a lot of people were worried about back then were, unfortunately, you know, like, Native Americans, you know, at the time, you know, they were quote unquote slaughtering people in the Midwest, and then you've got, you know, down in the South, there was lynchings and everything. So, I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, so, I'm so sorry, like, I started talking, and then, like, my brain goes one way, my mouth goes the other. I'm like, alright. So, Christian and his wife, you know, the unnamed wife that we don't know her name, they continued just searching all over the world for their son until they died. So Christian, he actually died in 1897, about 23 years after his son went missing. So he died like relatively young, and his wife ended up dying in 1912. 1912 is the same year as the Titanic. Interesting fact. And over the course of those years that they were still alive, they had interviewed over 570 boys, teenage boys, and young adult males all over the world who swore up and down that they were Charley. They were like, yeah, I'm Charley, you know, and they went on these leads, and every single one of them went to a dead end, and they were frauds. And I cannot even imagine how those parents must have felt. Like, they were trying so hard to find their son. They thought they had just the littlest glimmer of hope, and it got snatched away because it was a fake confession. Oh my God, I would have been pissed. Oh, that's just, oh, it just hurts me. It hurts my stomach actually just thinking about it. And over the course of their lives, they spent over $60,000 to find their son. That was back in that time period, $60,000. That's a lot of fucking money. That is a lot. And, you know, then it hit like 1924. So we're moving forward from the 1890s, 1912. Both parents, unfortunately, are deceased. And we're moving into 1924. Roaring 20s. This is like 50 years to the day after Charley was abducted. So newspapers on the 50th anniversary started just reprinting every single like flyer they could about the case. And Walter, who was now an adult, he was actually working as a stockbroker. Good for him, because, you know, remember back in he grew up in poverty because they were going through a depression, like not like the Great Depression, but it was still pretty damn bad, you know, like a lot of people didn't have money. And so he claimed, like, even after all these years later, after Charley was taken, he and his 3 sisters, I didn't even know he even had 3 sisters because they weren't mentioned prior, but he had 3 sisters. They were all, I don't know their names, it was not listed. And they began just receiving these letters by someone who claimed to be Charley. And the thing that caught me off guard was, okay, so this person's claiming to be Charley and he's writing them letters. Number one, how the hell would he know their names, their addresses, and like all this information about them? How the hell would this person know this unless it was Charley? But even then, Charley was 4 when he went missing. So who's to say that he even remembered all these, like, all the family members? And like I said, how could he have gotten the addresses? How would he know the names? And then most importantly, was it legitimately Charley or was it just a hoax? Because it's possible it could have been just a hoax and it was someone who knew the family and they knew the kids and everything, knew where they lived, and just was just trying to bring false hope, I guess you could say. So, speaking of fake people and fraudulent, you know, letters and everything, we're going to be talking about a man named Gustav Blair. Now, this is 1934, so it's all these, like, even more years later, so, oh geez. So, 1874, 1934. Oh. Someone do the math for me for that, because, oh my god, that's like a lot of years later. So, anyways, in 1934, a 69-year-old man, his name was Gustav Blair. He was a carpenter. And he was living in Phoenix, Arizona. And he claimed up and down that he was the real Charley Ross. He's like, I'm the real one. I'm the OG. It's me. I am Charley Ross. And he was like, this is the story what happened to me. He claimed to newspapers and to everybody he met that he was abducted as a child and he was raised in a cave. Which, if you've ever been to Arizona, you know they've got the canyons and they've got the caves and everything. So it's not, you know, not a false theory that he could have been raised in a cave, because they have a lot of those, because, you know, Arizona's known for the canyons and everything. So Walter Ross, the brother, you know, he's just like, ugh, this Gustav dude is really starting to piss me off, you know? So he's just telling everyone that this Gustav dude is a nut job. He's like, he's not Charlie. He's not my brother, okay? He's just pulling this out of his ass. You know, like, the entire family, they all gave up hope that Charlie was even still alive. They're like, there's no way. He can't be Charlie. So Gustav Blair actually went to court claiming that he was Charley Ross. And get this. The court, without having any, like, because back then they didn't have any DNA testing, anything to, like, fully prove that this man was Charley Ross, other than the fact that he was taken by a man and raised in the caves of Arizona, right? So the court ruled that Gustav Blair was, in fact, Charley Ross. Like, what the fuck? How do you just come up with the fact that, oh, this is Charley Ross, it's him? You know, like I said, back then they didn't have DNA testing, nothing. The family had no idea who this man was, yet now they have to say that it's their son, their brother, uncle, cousin, whoever it may be. They were just like, it has to be him. So the family, of course, they refused to believe this was Charlie. They're like, okay, whatever. He's just this now adopted cousin, son, brother. We don't know who the hell this is. We don't know him. He's not Charlie. He's not our family. And they actually left him out of all of the wills. They were like, yeah, fuck no. We don't know who this guy is. And whenever Gustav Blair actually died, get this, his name wasn't even Gustav Blair. His name wasn't Charley Ross either. His real name was Nelson Miller. And there was no official testing done at all to even see if he was this Gustav Blair who was living in a cave, or even Charley Ross. There was nothing done. Like, I'm sorry I'm laughing, but it's just ridiculous. Like, what the hell? Oh. So, we're going to be moving on now to talk about the aftermath of this case. So, the case and the fates of Mosher, Douglas, and Westerfeld, they did not bring up any big kidnapping cases since then. They were not involved in any other kidnapping cases since Charlie was taken. And the Charley Ross kidnapping was the biggest case for years. The next big profile kidnapping case after Charlie's was, 36 years later. Yeah, 36 years later, in 1900, with a boy by the name of Edward Cudahy Jr. I'm probably butchering that name. I'm so sorry. And the saying, don't take candy from strangers. It is actually said that the saying came from this case, because obviously they took candy from these strange people they'd never met before, and they ended up getting kidnapped, and now nobody knows what happened. So then, think about in 2004, 2005, there was a web sleuth person that came up with the missing persons database called the Charley Project, and it is actually named after Charley Ross, which, if you've ever used the Charley Project, that's where I usually get a lot of ideas for my cases. Please look into it. Oh my god, there's a lot of people out there, a lot of kids, grown-ups, even the elderly, who have been missing for years. I think the oldest one that I've seen on that page was someone who disappeared. It was a woman who disappeared back in 1910. So, I mean, there's a lot of information on there, and it's really interesting to me that this case was never solved. And it was ultimately ruled that this Gustav dude was Charley. Like, it's mind-blowing. But, my God. So, after all this, the aftermath and everything, now we're going to be talking about my thoughts on this case. So, my thoughts on this case is that I personally believe that Holmes Van Brunt, the judge's brother, definitely should not have shot at the intruders, because that just fucked everything up. Instead of shooting them, they could have hog-tied them, tied them to something, gotten a hold of the sheriff. Because, you know, like I said, it's 1874. Back then they didn't have, like, big police stations or whatever. So it's Philly, they could have gotten a hold of, like, the sheriff, like a police officer, just someone, and say, hey, these people broke into my house. And they'll, you know, they could have even straight up said, because, like, they even admitted that they are the ones that took Charley. They could have straight up showed them what happened to that little boy. And instead, they went pew, pew, pew with a gun. Like, oh my God. And, like, if they legitimately knew what happened to Charley, the secret of what happened to Charley went with them to the grave. And it's just, you killed the people that knew how to solve this case. So, that is all I have for us today. That is the awful and heartbreaking case of Charley Ross, the very first kid who was kidnapped and taken for ransom. So please let me know your thoughts and comments down below in the comments section. Like and subscribe, share this video with your friends, get all the word out there about what happened to this case, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!